Today I'll be talking about citizenship in the context of waste landscapes. I'd like to thank my university, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, for funding aspects of this research. I look forward to an exciting conversation. First, I have to figure out how to, here we go. In a suburban neighborhood, the smell of burning trash fills the air as an underground landfill fire creeps ever closer to buried radioactive waste. 1,000 miles away, a truck dumps construction debris beside an urban lake, where floating seeds will collect and take root next spring. Despite their obvious differences, we have been culturally conditioned to perceive both of these waste landscapes with disgust, and therefore to fear and disassociate our social structures from them. Waste and waste landscapes have become relegated to the peripheries of urban environments along with marginalized communities. Waste landscapes are sites of ambiguous citizenship, simultaneously belonging to everyone and no one through private creation and public accountability, and designating such responsibility to private enterprises through the commodification of waste. What does citizenship mean in the context of waste and waste landscapes, and what could it achieve? Can enhancing the legibility of waste become a means for inscribing citizenships? I argue that changing perceptions and attitudes toward waste can generate new forms of citizenship in waste landscapes and transform the human-waste relationship from passive to productive. To contextualize my formulation of citizenship in waste landscapes, I employ several theoretical frameworks. The first is the fallacy of dualistic Western objectivity, which separates a rational mind from irrational emotional and bodily experiences. In reality, complex relationships between perception, attitudes, and behaviors drive emotional reactions to our environments, including desire and disgust. Vittorio de Palma describes disgust as emerging from aesthetic taste, something that depends more on appearance than reality. In an experiment by psychologist Paul Rosen, subjects were repulsed when presented with fudge that looked like feces. Their disgust overpowered reason, body over mind. These emotional attitudes toward waste impact behavior, but the reverse is not always true. Andrew Dobson observes that a simple tax in Ireland cut plastic bag use by more than 90%, but without the behavioral incentive, people may likely revert to old habits. In order to change behaviors long-term, we must seek to change them through social attitudes. Attitudes form the basis for citizenship, the land to which people belong or don't. Affinity for place is an abstract emotional relationship between people and land, or a landship, as Kenneth Oldwig has described. In contrast to objective Western separations of mind and body, landship exists as a hybrid condition within and around the body, eliciting an emotional reaction and giving way to behavioral responses. Dualisms are constantly misused to rationalize landscape, urban or rural, natural or cultural. In reality, citizenship and landscape are hybrid conditions existing along a gradient. Waste landscapes are hybrid, engineered sites existing within and affected by biophysical systems, a condition Sarah Pritchard has termed envirotechnical landscapes. She emphasizes the ways non-human nature partly constitutes technology through material constraints. In waste landscapes, natural systems and technological processes of waste management cannot be separated. Landscape ethnoecology reveals that the legibility of those hybrid conditions is critical to the development of landscape citizenship. It describes the way land and its classification develop out of feedback loops that take in both land's potential and human ways of making a living. Cultural and environmental feedback loops shift citizenship. These frameworks enable close and critical readings of citizenships in envirotechnical waste landscapes, how they emerge, change, evolve, and at times are indeterminate. The English comments prior to enclosure provide valuable historical context for this evolution. Commons are more than things and resources. They also describe the social practices and values used to manage them. Peter Linebaugh uses commons as a verb. The activity of commoning is conducted through labor with other resources. Commoning generates a landship grounded in attitudes about landscape and community, resulting in behaviors of resource exchange. Waste was a democratized resource, giving commoners a variety of useful products and a means of exchange. Such attitudes toward waste and wasteland in the commons were not crowded and discussed, but in community and economy. Taboos about waste evolved with modern sanitation science. All kinds of waste were generalized as unsanitary, and the ability to hide and manage it became a measure of status. As Mira Engler describes, waste is becoming everyone's issue once again, reconsidered as, quote, a resource, a symbol of environmental crisis and its possible cure, end quote. Recommoning waste as a shared resource may be one of our greatest challenges in the 21st century. Waste becomes most legible the moment its infrastructure fails, often leading to environmental injustice. Concern over brownfields materialized in the late 1970s with the Love Canal. When an unregulated municipal and industrial chemical dump site was covered with earth, hazardous waste became invisible, and a suburban working-class neighborhood was built on the site. Residents were forced to become vocal, involuntary citizens of this toxic landscape when they fell ill. As a matter of life or death, they vocalized their knowledge, experiences, and concerns in order to bring visibility to the site. Finally, the site's toxicity was exposed after record rainfall, and unable to ignore a visible threat, President Carter ordered the residents' relocation. This moment marked a significant turning point in the environmental justice movement, leading to the passage of the Comprehensive Environmental Responsibilities and Liabilities Act in 1980, and the Love Canal was eventually cleaned up. A reactive rather than preventative approach, this legislation has failed to consistently and actively address these widespread hazardous conditions. The invisibility of waste and toxicity permits complacency, ignorance, and neglect, removing the sense of urgency that might prevent tipping points. Visible toxicity has the capacity to invite an appropriate attitude of disgust toward truly dangerous waste, and therefore to make apparent that not all wastes present the same dangers or deserve the same management strategy. Infrastructure is used to disguise waste to restrict the potential for it to become visibly registered as an indicator. Similar conditions have led to other involuntary landships of toxic waste sites nationwide. Over 40 years since the Love Canal, a radioactive smoldering landfill exemplifies how waste illegibility and mismanagement can shift citizenship of waste sites. Uranium processing for the first atomic bombs occurred in St. Louis, Missouri. The West Lake landfill is one relic of this activity, widely regarded as one of the most high-profile and complex Superfund sites in the U.S. A former limestone quarry turned waste repository, landfilling operations in the 1970s used 46,000 tons of radioactive material, uranium ore residues from the Manhattan Project, surreptitiously mixed with soil as a daily cover. Underground smoldering in an area of the landfill has been slowly spreading toward the radioactive waste, compounding the situation further. The air smells of burning chemicals, and residents monitor wind patterns and toxicity using carbon monoxide detectors outside their homes. Perceived as a highly controlled, engineered landscape isolated from the natural world, the landfill is in fact heavily affected by biophysical systems. Wind, water, and fire moving and acting above and below the Earth's surface renders these conditions visible. The Westlake Superfund landfill presents several conflicts around waste and calls into question the role of landscape citizenship and responsibility. Public and private entities are intertwined in this landscape, from the US government to the private company who owns the landfill to hundreds of impacted residents. Although the government and the owner assure the public that both the fire and radioactivity are under control, third-party tests have yielded different results. The scent of burning garbage heightens the threats posed by this radioactive landscape. Body and mind reveal the clear and present dangers of the site. By necessity, affected through illness and death, residents have become vocal citizens of this landscape by insisting on its visibility. The Westlake landfill is our present-day Love Canal gone nuclear. Nearly a decade since residents began demanding change, the EPA has announced plans to move the contaminants out of state. In other words, the problem will be shifted onto new human and non-human communities. Waste is not a human product discrete from the natural world. It is variable, and waste landscapes must be understood as envirotechnical systems. Local communities like this one play critical roles in leveraging their involuntary landship to create visibility for toxic waste landscapes, enacting social and environmental change. The Leslie Street Spit in Toronto, Canada, on the other hand, is an example of voluntary citizenship of an envirotechnical waste landscape. It's an active construction debris dumping site that was once perceived as a valueless wasteland. Extending the Lake Ontario shoreline 5 kilometers and adding over 500 hectares of land, the spit is an artifact of material byproducts such as dredged sediment and construction debris that have accumulated since 1959. Plant and animal actors have populated this substrate of waste, collectively participating in the manufacture of this novel peninsula. Wildflower meadows, cottonwood forests, coastal marshes, cobbled beaches of brick, and sand dunes share space with active waste dumping and the formalized and accessible Tommy Thompson Park. As a world-renowned bird sanctuary and a spontaneously emerging ecological reserve, it is celebrated by residents as a symbol of wilderness in the city. The accidental ecology that took over this large wasteland can be accessed on foot from downtown Toronto. The spit hosts active dumping on weekdays and park access in off hours. Originally belonging to the public domain, the spit as a waste heap inspired disgust, and no one claimed responsibility for it. But some curious citizens found beauty there and explored the landscape with open minds, beginning a collective perceptual shift that led to social reclassification of the landscape. A byproduct of logistical waste management, the spit is visible evidence of the shared and intertwined relationship between dumping, manufacturing land, and productive opportunistic habitation by human and non-human assemblages, generating a new commons built upon and propelled by waste. How did residents assign value to a valueless landscape? As De Palma explains, quote, "Disgust as an emotion harbors a contradictory duality. We are both repelled and transfixed," end quote. This echoes Tim Waterman's discussion of neophilia and neophobia, the fear and love of the new, the foreign. Misunderstanding can create fear and misperception. Landship follows from beauty, ownership, love, respect, and compassion. In order to find beauty and disgust, one must allow curiosity to flourish. Citizens explored and encountered this waste landscape in a new light. When certain waste conditions are framed as desirable, value is assigned, creating a social feedback loop of claiming ownership that can draw others. Local knowledge and understanding can make such wastelands legible as part of the commons, engendering an experience of beauty. The Blue Lagoon in southwest Iceland is another example of voluntary citizenship in a waste landscape, but here, commodification has reversed the creation of a commons through privatization and enclosure. Known for its bright blue color, the Blue Lagoon materialized as a spa industry out of geothermal waste effluent from the adjacent Svartsenki geothermal power station. Oxidation of minerals from geothermal effluent clogged the bedrock's pores, forming the lagoon. At first, the National Energy Authority claimed involuntary citizenship in this landscape by calling out the lagoon as an environmental disaster. In typical Icelandic fashion, however, residents perceived the lagoon not as a disgusting byproduct from an industrial process, but as warm water to bathe in. An ethno-ecological landship of geothermal energy combined with a culture built around bathing in warm geothermal water wherever it is found allowed residents to claim this waste landscape voluntarily as a commons, transforming the landscape from undesirable product to an unexpected recreational oasis. Nearly a decade later, by 1987, its popularity led to the construction of a modest bathhouse in order to formalize public access. By 1999, the Blue Lagoon had developed a complex of buildings, a spa, a research and development center, and a psoriasis clinic. Over time, formalization privatized this waste landscape. With a unique microbial and algal ecosystem and mineral-rich water that generates silica mud, the Blue Lagoon is now the top tourist destination in Iceland, hosting over 1.3 million visitors in 2017. A human ecology and economy developed out of materials and conditions perceived as waste. However, as the Blue Lagoon has developed over the last decade, so have its developers' strategies for catering to tourists from cultures that perceive all industrial waste as undesirable and potentially harmful. Although the hybrid waste relationships between power plant and spa industry are novel and continue to develop, this negative perception has resulted in marketing and communication strategies that make these processes less legible to visitors in an attempt to choreograph a high-end natural spa experience. The everyday visitor is unaware of both the Blue Lagoon's fascinating origins and its ongoing innovative waste-sharing developments. Waste legibility can be an asset shared by active industrial operations, a novel ecological community, and recreational uses, as demonstrated by the Leslie Street Spit. In the case of the Blue Lagoon, the formalization of this wasteland commons negated a democratic space by creating a high-end, unaffordable, privatized spa industry that conceals the underlying waste reuse frameworks that created the landscape in its unique conditions. Akin to the way in which enclosure of the commons in England commodified the landscape, the Blue Lagoon has evolved from a landship commons of productive wasteland to a commodity of landscape consumption by global tourists. In order to meet this demand, the narrative of this waste landscape has been suppressed in order to cater to elite globalized tastes driven by disgust instead of fascination. Waste visibility creates landships by generating emotional connections. Whether those relationships are voluntary or involuntary, and whether the waste is benign or toxic, visibility creates informed citizens with the ability to use their bodies and minds to understand the nuances of waste, breaking down binary barriers that separate knowledge from experience. Toxic waste like radioactive contamination should not be handled or perceived in the same way as non-toxic waste like geothermal effluent. The visibility of their differences make it possible to both address real dangers and celebrate unique and generative properties. Visibility forces communal action when waste is dangerous. And when it is not a threat, visibility makes possible its adoption into the commons as a collective resource. Waste landscapes have the potential to become emergent sites of landscape democracy by giving everyone access to unique, transformative places which, through human relationships of exchange, become visible registrations of landscape justice. The waste landscapes described illustrate that legibility may occur through disaster or through changing perceptions. One must be able to see, understand, and relate to a place to consider oneself a citizen of it, whether voluntary or not. Working with disgust and fascination, neophobia and neophilia can be a key to changing attitudes and behavior towards waste landscapes, leading to voluntary and productive landships. Designers have the capacity to foster landship by making waste intentionally visible, before the environmental, social, and technological systems keeping them hidden fail. Rather than avoiding their challenging conditions, waste landscapes must be embraced as opportunities for creating productive relationships with waste as a common ground through enhancing legibility, fostering a sense of responsibility, and empowering citizens to become agents of change. Thank you.